had a customer, they delivered food in flat boxes during big sporting events. They have API endpoints for each of their store locations. In the morning, they would get an order sent in via the API, and it's a small, like $1.75 for like a 2-liter soda, right? But nobody ever came and picked it up. It was a pickup order. Then at the end of the day, they would get a similar order. We realized that their order numbers are sequential. So the beginning of the day, it's order number, just say 001, and at the end of the day, it's order number 2055. So somebody, maybe a competitor, identifying the volume of orders for each of these stores in this region. I want a competitive advantage. I know which areas have the most traffic flow, and I can put a competing brand in there.
All right, Tony, you've been at Akamai for 13 years, give or take. And for most of that time, we'll start with bot management. Every bot management system was really one question, right? Is it a human or is it machine, right? And so now, thinking about that in today's world, that question is fundamentally dead. Like if you're still trying to be like human or machine, you're in the wrong place. So now we have an interesting issue, which is legitimate traffic hitting an enterprise website or a SaaS website or any API system. Is this human? Is it an AI agent doing work on behalf of a real person or an agentic system? And so now the question is kind of inverted, right? Where it's no longer bot versus human. It's like it's good bot versus bad bot, or good traffic versus bad traffic. So just to start with, like, let's talk to me about that. Like, how does this change the world?
Yeah, it's been a long journey, and you're right. The first steps were, is this human or is this a bot? And you're looking at signals and fidelity from a device. What kind of information does it give to you? The first and foremost thing, you look at kind of the technical aspects, right? If I'm claiming to be a certain user agent for a certain browser type, am I presenting the right headers that match that? And you go all the way down the line, as you see bots being more evasive, they start doing things that they want to look more and more like what they're presenting. That's kind of the first standard level. But then you have the case where I have legitimate reasons to have this bot hitting me, right? I'm a travel company and I've got, just say Kayak or someone doing aggregation of my data so that they can present it to their customers. That's a really interesting case, because you do want to allow that traffic, but you now have to manage it. You have to make sure that there's no abusive overreach. If someone makes, instead of 1 request per minute, they make 10,000 requests per minute, that could be, a pretty big issue, right? And then as we go down the line, obviously when you're logging in, you want to be able to, if it's a person logging in, you say, okay, they're coming from a mobile device. I see the accelerometer data of their phone moving, et cetera. As they log in, I can see when they punch their username and password that it looks like someone's typing it. It's not, but bots would replay legitimate user traffic that looks like a real login, right? Mm-hmm. So then you have to have a buffer time to say, okay, let's watch for replays during this amount of time, et cetera. The interesting thing that's changing now, like you said, these agents are now operating on behalf of users. So if you say, Alexa, book me some travel, which is very quickly coming down the pike, right? You have to be able to allow that, but also manage that interaction, manage that relationship. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge. Not bot or human, or is it the right bot? But now you have identities attached to autonomous action that will look very human-like because they're going through a kind of a path, a script. And how do you actually manage that relationship? And that's, in my mind, I think that's kind of the maybe third tier of bot management. When you look at typical bot management, a lot of pressure may be put down at the login point, right? Which is kind of the bottom of the funnel. This is where transactions are very expensive. and you want to filter out the needles from the hay. But once they get down there, you're looking for a needle in a needle stack. These are things that are very specifically supposed to look like a login. They're supposed to look like a user, a human. How do you differentiate that? With agentic traffic, now you have to kind of take another step back and say, okay, what do we know about where this traffic's originating from? Is it originating from an agentic platform? So you have your traditional kind of bot. What IP address range is it coming from? What time of day is this happening? Is this look normal? But this is kind of a real interesting challenge. Not to mention the fact that the whole internet now is being scraped and crawled via these new training bots. So now how do you manage the relationship of an agentic fetcher or crawler that's coming through? How do you make sure that your business is being represented properly? So that's another new challenge. You know, the beginning of the internet was humans going online, and we're like literally just, I remember hearing from word of mouth, hey, this is a really cool website.
Yep.
I think it was called Gabo Corp or something like that. And they had all these flash animations, and there's all these different levels of it you could go in. And that was the beginning of the internet, us searching for websites. And then the browser wars came and the search engine wars came. And now it's, what can you tell these search engines via SEO about your brand, about your presence? How are you being represented? This third wave is now the agentic bot wave. And now a lot of corporations don't realize the way that their brands are being portrayed is there's a big fundamental miss. One, because the agents are only going to spend, just say 10,000 tokens, right? It's for this agentic process, it's a token usage thing. This is why companies are like, wow, we just blew past our token budget. Now we're spending thousands of extra dollars a day, right? So a bot will only use maybe 10K tokens. The average website read takes 100K because there's all this code and all this information. So one of the new challenges is, how do we make sure that that agentic crawler is viewing our brand the way we want our brand to be viewed? So kind of squeezing down the amount of token usage, hopefully down to under 1,000 tokens. That's the first step, is presenting a view of the website that's devoid of all the code and all the other superfluous information, and just giving that good brand-related content, so that when I say, ChatGPT, I want to run a marathon. Obviously, I'm not the guy running marathons, but where should I go to buy the best running shoes, and who has the best information for blah, blah, blah? As a brand who sells sneakers, for instance, you want to be that authoritative answer. So now having citations and being an authoritative response is the new kind of gold rush. So it's a real fundamental change now. It's basically SEO for agentic bots, which is called AEO and GEO.
I think I made one question here before I'm going to go completely off the rails.
Yeah.
So, what stands out, like listening to you here, is I can remember 20 years ago when the Google crawler, became an issue for websites and our clients, and forcing a decision or a conversation that people had never heard of or thought before. Because if your site was fast and responded to Google fast, then Google would index more of your site and then would give priority because your site was fast. And so then you're in this issue of like, how much resources was the crawler consuming from you versus what was your perceived outcome from it, and how important the crawler was in Google driving traffic to you. And and there was always this push, for personalization. Back then, it was like a big thing. You wanted like all these dynamic, widgets on a page that was very personalized to user. Although I don't think it actually mattered ever for any website, right? But like everybody wanted it. We got into conversations, and some of those conversations became like user agent. I mean, Google was actually a really good user agent because it would identify itself, and we can make decisions of, if it is the Google user agent, only serve cached content off of the CDN and don't allow dynamic content, or don't allow origin fetching from the CDN, and just boom, CDN only. And it was very efficient use of resources then to serve all that traffic because it was already cached, it was already there, it was like whatever, and it was really fast crawl rates. But until you had that experience and had that conversation, you weren't forcing a decision. And the bot, the bot issue and like good versus bad traffic, turns into what's your priority? And this becomes the interesting conversation to have because you can block 100% of the quote bad bot traffic, but then what percentage of your good traffic do you lose as a result as well, right? And like, how do you find that equilibrium of false positive versus, and then also what is actually occurring? What are these bots doing to you? Are they defacing your website, or is it user generated content, or is it credit card transactions, or is it, you're doing some sort of sneaker drop, or, whatever it actually is, like what's the financial outcome for people? And so then there's like the scale of like, balancing what your false positive rate is against what your, desired outcome is. And then you get into this other vector, which is, can you make the transaction more expensive than it's worth it for the bad actor to actually do against you in the first place, which is a very common technique in one of these things.
Yep.
But like that conversation doesn't happen most of the time. Like why aren't people talking like, is this just an awareness thing, or is it until you've gotten into this pain cycle, you don't really look at this?
Yeah, there's two kind of, I think there's a couple different approaches. So one, let's take the sneaker drop, for instance. I was actually taking part in a executive dinner. We're at an executive chef's house where it's set up for entertainment, and all these execs come in that are partners with Akamai, and maybe another partner, and they come in and we're talking, and the conversation came up of sneaker bots, and it was like there's like the sneaker hacker's handbook, which is basically all this information about literally what API endpoints to hit. They share information, keep under these rate controls. You want to browse the site early so that you have older cookies that make you look more like a real, shopper.
Right.
And then the chef, after all of this, he's kind of overhearing this. He says, "Oh, that's funny because my son was trying to get these sneakers and he could never make the drop. And so I bought him this sneaker bot." And sure enough, and he told us how, his son really wanted these sneakers, and the only way to get them was to play by the same rules as the sneaker hackers, right? The people trying to get the drop. Right. And that kind of inventory sniping methodology, the awareness of that changes based on your business model. So just say you're a sneaker manufacturer, you're based in the US, and you've been building a relationship with sneaker buyers over the years. All these great quotes, athlete, attribution and partnerships, etc. When a drop happens, you want to communicate with your customer because they trust your brand. And if I'm buying these sneakers, it'd be a great time for personalization to say, hey, this hoodie or this tracksuit would look great with those sneakers. And to have a bot come in and buy all of those shoes, and then they're sold on the secondary market now, your customers are TO'd, right?
Brand damage, real brand damage.
Exactly. Yep. But if you're a big sneaker warehouse and a bot comes in and buys all these shoes, you're kind of like, score, right? We just made a great sale.
Yep.
So the relational aspect of what your brand means to the buyer often raises the stakes quite a bit when it comes to dealing with these problems. And that's kind of the first stage, I think, of all of this. The second stage is the more a bot operator wants something from you, the more likely they are to be extremely evasive against all of the different techniques that you're using to block these attacks, right? And that becomes a real cat and mouse game, because if I am a well-resourced bot operator, I've got nothing but time, right? I'm trying to make money, and I can play by any rule set that I have to in order to get what I need. And that kind of thing becomes a real cat and mouse challenge, because the evasive techniques, we'll go back to that funnel. The top of this funnel is your regular bot operations. The problem is broad,
Yep.
but is relatively inexpensive to deal with.
Yep.
This is like garbage traffic.
Yep.
Are they sending headers that I shouldn't even respond to because it's obvious that they're bad? Or are they announcing themselves as a good bot? You know, Googlebot announces itself. It presents header information. It comes from a certain IP range. The early bot operators, they realized, hey, if I send Googlebot traffic scripted from Google Sheets, you know, the Excel of Google, it's coming from Google IP space.
Yep.
So if you don't have the right fidelity, now, of course, it's a different IP range, and the domain sent is called Google User Content, not google.com. If you don't have the fidelity to match those and make a decision based on yes or no of these different indicators, you might allow that traffic through. So looking at kind of your first stage, it's a very finite problem. As you go down the funnel, this is where bots are being more evasive, or the techniques in which they're doing what they're doing potentially could cause more impact. So you really have to manage that relationship. Then there's bots that do something. It's basically called like a first page scrape. So the first time you ever see this bot, they already are going to exactly what they want, and before you can inject any kind of JavaScript or try to get telemetry from that bot, they're getting what they need.
Right.
So now there's this idea of like, okay, well, do you have like an interstitial page that they have to hit before, you know what I mean?
It's just such a tax on the internet. You know, you look at this stuff, right?
It's wild,
and you know, like at this point, like DDoS mitigation, DDoS protection. Like if you've ever been on the receiving end of a DDoS attack, you have mitigation in place going forward, right? But like you've been through the experience, so then you don't want to experience it again. But if you haven't been through the experience, then it's like, well, why do I need to pay this money? Which is just really a tax on your operations. And you're like, I'm sorry, this is just, the internet's a really hostile place.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what to tell you. Like it's not, you know, this isn't like, you know, fields of grass. When did you know internally that the human versus machine framing was over? Like, is there like D-Day for like, oh, we've just crossed the Rubicon. We're never putting this back in the bottle. Like, this is done now. We need to rethink things.
Yeah, I mean, the agentic crawling has been happening for quite some time. Going back to the original bot thing, there's a robots.txt, which is a file you put on your web server, and the good bots are supposed to read that and identify it. Well, there's now an LLM.txt, which...
Again, supposed to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Big surprise. Bots and crawlers are not honoring that to some degree, right? Especially evasive ones. So even your best intention of kind of trying to present the right information to a bot so that they have some guidelines of what rules to follow, they're going around that. And when we talk about a DDoS attack, you know, having a really good, successful marketing campaign can seem like a DDoS attack to your website. It can seem like a layer 7 flood of all these people coming in and trying to view your web page and browsing and doing all this stuff. You have to be able to identify. You can't just, you know, the old joke is, you know, in every movie that there's like a hacker situation, I'll do air quotes, they say cut the hard lines, and there's an axe in the data center and they just cut the hard lines. I'm like, you can't turn off the website, right? You can't turn off, think of the biggest websites in the world. You can't turn them off. You have to continue to allow that good traffic.
You know what, I wouldn't give for a good send flood, right? Like it's just like you're talking about, like, you know, the things that we were so stressed out about, you know, and now you're like, oh, gee, that would be so nice if it was just that simple.
Yeah.
You touched on this briefly, right? But Akamai's engineering team published this late last year, talking about, you know, how bot management had to evolve from, you know, good versus bad and an intent to intent versus identity. You kind of like touched on that briefly, but tell me more about this. Let's go deeper into this.
Yeah, and it's kind of a pairing of identity and intent, right? So just say somehow Googlebot gets taken over and starts really hitting your infrastructure more so than it should. This is where that kind of needle in the haystack versus needle in the needle stack comes in, right? You have to still identify what the bot is trying to do, and if they're going past the meets and bounds of the typical relationship you have with them, you have to be able to quota that and kind of have a management framework for that. And that's kind of a mix. There's a lot of things going on. It's a mix between bot management, and in some cases, there may be an API gateway that's in between all this, because a lot of this is happening now via APIs, especially the agentic flood that's happening. They're hitting your API, kind of surface level structure there. And that's where the abuse really comes in and could be potentially catastrophic for a brand if an agentic bot comes in and starts doing something that it's not supposed to do. So how do you identify the difference between kind of your base level crawling and something abusive? A lot of times it's not readily apparent, basically because APIs are meant for automation.
Right.
So now you can't say, well, this...
You published it, it's supposed to be there, right? Like it's the intent.
Exactly. So now every misconfiguration or potential flaw in how that API structure works could now potentially be abused. And the abuse is not always inherently visible.
Right.
Right. So, just say I've used this example in the past. You had a customer, they delivered food in flat boxes during big sporting events. You can imagine what that is, right? They're getting hit, their API interfaces. They have API endpoints for each of their store locations. And this one region was getting a very interesting call out. In the morning, they would get an order sent in via the API, and it's a small, like $1.75 for like a 2-liter soda, right? But nobody ever came and picked it up. It was a pickup order. Then at the end of the day, they would get a similar order. And we're like, okay, maybe are they validating credit card numbers? Is this, because it's a low transaction
It's weird.
amount.
It's weird.
Yeah.
It stands out. Yep.
Yeah. But as we start to kind of do some research and dig into this, we realize that their order numbers are sequential. So at the beginning of the day, it's order number, just say 001. And at the end of the day, it's order number 2055. So somebody, maybe a competitor, was hitting these API interfaces and identifying the volume of orders for each of these stores in this region.
Oh, geez.
So now if I want a competitive advantage, I know which areas have the most traffic flow, and I can put a competing brand in there. So the bot game and how these things work out is not always in your face, attack or whatnot,
To identify that and then respond to that. There's this weird transaction for one soda that happens twice a day.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
If somebody wasn't really curious and just had this thing take hold in the back of their psyche that they couldn't let go.
Oh, absolutely.
This is one of those things where it's like you just had some freak that was just like, what is this doing here? And they couldn't let it go. I've been down these rabbit holes before. I hate the term democratization of tech, right? But when you start talking about now all these automations that are hitting the desktop, use the example of Alexa and these voice agents that we have, on our devices or in our homes. But now the barrier to run a bot has gone from buying a specialized bot, like for the sneaker drops, into you just put in this tool on your desktop and give the tool access to your desktop, and you can have full automation on your desktop. We're now, it's like everything is a bot. We're like a heartbeat away from are people can actually interact with websites on their own anymore, and what does a website actually look like, and how do we manage this? So I don't even know where to go with this, but in your example of this soda, it's how do you then tell good versus bad in real time when you have so much noise? Like how do you have any shot of actually identifying the signal that goes into that and say, this is weird, there's something happening here?
Yeah. I think it goes back to this funnel mentality. At the top of the funnel, you need to manage those. You need to have filtration. You need to have kind of relationship agreements with quota management and whatever else you have. As the evasive action goes even deeper, you need to have a response at that level as well. You don't want this big swath of the problem to go down to the very bottom of the funnel, which I mentioned at the beginning, is very expensive, and your fidelity has to be extremely high to be able to tell whether or not to allow this new user account creation, a checkout, a payment, all that stuff. So managing the everything from top to bottom is such a important factor. There is early indication now that because of agentic chatbots and kind of this agent experience, that consumers are becoming more well researched before they even go and interact with your brand.
Right.
So how do you...
The buyer's journey changed a long time ago. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
How do you make sure that via that interface with their favorite, your favorite Black Mirror device that you're asking questions to and all this, how do you make sure that your brand is included in that?
I mean, this is like the thing that's going to kill you. You also need in order to survive, And I mean, so now there's, going back to an earlier example, I think the simplistic view of it is saying, okay, what percentage of good traffic are we blocking, right? And we had a marketplace customer, I'll just brand it that, where users were submitting information to the site in order for transactions to occur. So now this marketplace had two issues. One, they needed to have a lot of activity on their marketplace in order to have a consumer go and shop and purchase and make the system functional, right? But then they have a brand safety issue, and the CEO is talking about like brand safety. But every time that they ratchet up their brand safety measures, it decreases listings, and it's the majority of listings it's blocking, of course, are garbage, and they want to get rid of in the first place. But then you lose a percentage of good listings, but then your overall listing capacity decreases as well. So now right? But even still, you have like at least somebody's looking at it in a spreadsheet and being like, if we dial this up a little bit, this is what the impact is to the business. Yeah. Your example of saying, hey, are you giving a competitor real actionable market intelligence against your business? Like, how do you quantify that to then, because most of the justifications for tech purchases come into some sort of like quantifiable metric of like, invest this money, get this outcome. What's your quantifiable mechanism that now you're going to talk to a board about and say, hey, we need to do this because this is going to happen and this is the brand damage that comes out of it? Like, how do you quantify brand damage from a competitor saying like, oh, this is a good market for us to go establish operations in,
Well, and the real challenge there is that these two parts of the org usually don't talk to each other. Of course, yeah. There's a security function worried about abuse and fraud and damage. And then there's a marketing, SEO, brand awareness, comms function that years ago they did not talk to each other. More and more often as I talk to CISOs and work within the community, we're starting to see what's called a cyber fusion function. Where, and I know it sounds...
No, I mean, it's cool. I'm thinking Jack Bauer already.
Yeah. So cyber fusion is basically having these different teams that normally don't talk to each other, share dashboards, share information, have executive ownership shared across the org so that they can have that same visibility. If I'm a bot, if I'm in charge of security and bot mitigation at a corporation, I would love to know if a new brand campaign has gone viral and now we're getting an influx in good user traffic. I'll use Super Bowl as an example. Every single Super Bowl, there's a commercial for a truck, right?
Right. Yes, probably multiple trucks. Yes.
Yeah. But for sure, when that commercial goes off, that costs however many millions of dollars for 30 seconds or 60, the eyeballs of the people will go to that brand. And where the eyeballs go and the attention goes, that's where the attackers go as well, for a couple different purposes. One, it would be a great time if I want to make some sort of message, my line in the sand. Yeah. If I want to damage that brand, the best time to do it would be at their peak day.
Right.
So we see attackers often launch attacks during these brand, high spots.
Right.
In fact, there's a direct correlation, and we see this across the Akamai platform. We see 20 to 30% of the world's web traffic. When we were streaming the FIFA World Cup, one year this happened. There was an opening game of play between, I think, Croatia and Chile. And what happened was, during that time where those two teams were playing, we saw attack traffic cross the internet against brands in Chile from Croatia and vice versa.
Yes.
Right? So the idea of like garnering attention, that's the brand's whole job. But what happens, what's the side-off effect of that?
I learned this a painful way. I was running a data center business, and one of our customers had their friend was running for minor off. I don't know if it was mayor or like the equivalent of like thinking like state house in Mexico. And so the owner of our customer was friends with this person, made an endorsement, donated money or something. And I will tell you, if you're not prepared to deal with the Latin American politics and like it was crazy.
Yeah.
What this kicked off. And we don't see that very much in the US. Like somebody runs for office, it's like the blast radius is relatively small.
Yeah.
Like political campaigns themselves have to be very secure and take measures, but everything, if you donate, it was nuts. Like we ended up in a position where as a company, it was like, if you are involved in LATAM politics, we cannot host you without these things being in place because it was so significant. And, and back then, 10 gig was a thick pipe. But when you're getting, like volumetric 40, 50, 60, 70 gig attacks against a platform, and you're making decisions of like, are we going to try to mitigate this, or do we just null route the customer and be like, sorry, and then of course they're upset because they're like, well, what do you mean we have to invest all this money in order to do X, Y, and Z? I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not on stage with this guy, A lot of things in tech, come from this place that's like, it's not like altruistic. It's more like, it's like blissful naivety, right? Email is created. There's no authentication mechanism around it. BGP is created. There's no protections with it because it's like this, everything's going to be great. And then of course time passes and it becomes entrenched to the point you can't replace it. But then all the bad actors, like people can figure out how to manipulate these things to, whether it's just because they want to pull a prank or actually do defacements or make a political statement or it's financial or whatever. Is this something that we're going to see standards catch up and deal with this? Is this is this like really going to be a, vendor by vendor, customer by customer? We're all, we get benefits of aggregation. You use Akamai, you've got a lot of traffic, you can see a lot of things, but how much of this is just going to become, we're going to see evolution of technology and standards to deal with this stuff, or is it just going to be like the Wild West?
What I always say is the internet was never built to run your business. It was not built for that, right? And the open standards and the open communication protocols are made so that no one owns the internet and how it communicates, right? So to a certain degree, and we have some things like DNSSEC now, protocols that are requiring further authentication or encryption or some sort of
RPKI for route announcements.
Exactly, right. But for the most part, the internet is still the Wild West, and the rules can only be enforceable to the part of the internet that you own. Right. right? So when I was a sysadmin and network administrator, all I could do was manage from the inbound connection I had, my edge router or the edge firewall I'm using. That's where I cared about the traffic. Of course, I would have multiple circuits. So, if I needed so if a circuit went down, we had a backup,
Right.
and then we had like ISDN for, if both circuits go down, you can still manage the route interfaces and et cetera, right? But now a lot of orgs are realizing, when you look at a global platform like Akamai, for instance, having points of presence all over the world allows you to push your policy sets and your rule sets further out onto the internet, closer to where the bad guys and the good guys are actually routing onto the internet. So part of that, and this is why you see cloud platforms and big platforms kind of tout their ability to provide the same rules that you might be putting on your edge router for blocking traffic, geo-based traffic or bad IP traffic, et cetera. They say, we'll do that at the cloud, the cloud interconnect with the internet. But if you can push those rule sets right down the street from where the attacker is, like in a local POP right down, just say the good guy and the attacker are in Singapore, they're going to hit an Akamai edge server that's in a POP right down the street from them. And that's where your business's security policy can deal with that traffic. So you're taking kind of the funnel effect that normally happens with all these water hoses coming from the internet, and then it comes down, a master pipe into your data center. Before you can say no, you've already routed all of that. Saying no earlier, I think, is part of the answer.
I 100% agree and love this as a technique. Right?
Yeah.
You look at tier one backbone providers and how much of that traffic is dealt with flow spec or ACLs on an ingress egress interface, like way out on the edge, versus what actually hits a scrubbing center on their backbone, right?
Yeah.
Like absolutely 100% great. But it comes back to this earlier question of like, as soon as you start doing that, the fidelity isn't perfect, right? We're not talking like at a per flow, per traffic, per session basis. You are making a decision and you're outsourcing then that decision to that service provider of like what is good and what is bad, especially, if it's like an automated filtering, like, oh, you're under attack from, Sao Paulo, Brazil, right? Like we're going to start filtering aggressively in this location. And then when you filter one location, you see it kind of like pop around a little bit and eventually it gets up to Miami, but these filters are in place. But as soon as those filters turn on, your users are going to experience it. Like legitimate traffic gets caught up with this as well, and how does a CISO balance this? Like in terms of like protect the brand, protect the business, protect revenue, don't lose revenue, these are competing issues that people have to contend with.
Yeah. I think so the first methodology is web traffic, right? And web traffic, having your policies be at those edge devices, you're not outsourcing it. You're outsourcing the infrastructure of that to an edge server, but your security policy is what makes that decision. So bot management, any existing ACLs that you have for in or out of geo traffic, IP reputation, even API security controls can be done at that edge location. On the scrubbing center side, when you deal with what IP addresses are you announcing to the internet, the interesting thing there is that we have like freestanding ACLs for mitigation in place. We know that the jumbo frame that's the UDP response from an NTP server reflection attack looks like this. So if we ever see any of that traffic, we just drop it, right? So you can layer on these things, and ultimately, scrubbing centers are very important because the more you have, the more distributed your ability to ACL things are, right? The good traffic that's not being mitigated, I guess this is an interesting point. When you're mitigating attack traffic, the only way good traffic gets caught up in that is if you scrub all of it. But when you have the identification of what the offending IP address is, the /32 for each individual IP address, you send that through a routed path to be scrubbed and to identify what the problem is. The good traffic is on a bypass filter. And most of the time, if you're in a big data center like Equinix, there's a layer 2 connection that can plug directly from our backbone directly into your data center backbone. So that clean traffic is minimally affected. And that's the idea. But to your earlier point, how do you know when is the time to go all in? And how do I know that I need to step up my operations to include all of these mitigations in place, right? And that doesn't even handle DNS.
Right.
Most of the DDoS attacks we see, they also do DNS top-level query floods.
Oh,
all these things.
They
at the
bounce
same
around
time.
infrastructure. It's like whack-a-mole. You like whack down one thing, and I mean, and it's always DNS, right? Like all your failure patterns are.
There's a shirt.
I love the
It's
shirt.
always DNS. Yeah.
I have it on my desktop, right? It's, and once upon a time you had to run your own auth name servers, and nowadays you just shouldn't, right? Like it's still easy to deploy, but fortunately there's plenty of options out there to keep you from running your own DNS auth, your life, and like, even if you're trying to do like DNS based GSLB, like just don't run. Yeah. It's not worth the pain of running your own auth. But it's like I don't want to go down the WAF rabbit hole, but WAF has been around for a long time, and it's still very low percentage adoption from my experience of people actually enabling that, signing that line in the contract, enabling that flag, doing whatever. And now, and so bot was like very specific for people that were going through bot pain. And now we see this convergence happening very quickly. Also don't really love that term, but convergence happening really quickly. And it feels like a lot of people are going to have to pay catch up, and it's going to be a painful, like, we're in for some like pain cycles of people like understanding what the reality that they haven't had to deal with for a while. So like, how long before this becomes table stakes? Like, what's the like, are we 6 months out from like 18 months out? Like,
Yeah, I think I think WAF there's always been a question of false positives and what are you going to block versus what are you not going to block. But I think WAFs are a key fundamental filtration that you need in front of your high-value web properties. If you don't have that, the only alternative to that is making changes based on the effect of bad traffic. And that's how we've done things for years, right? I say us as the IT security community. If you don't have a way to slice and dice each of these different traffic flows and maybe even follow your consumer experience and look at these things at different levels, the only way something has gone wrong is if all of a sudden the server's overloaded because this API is getting flooded with garbage traffic, right? Or maybe someone sent an attack through this API that is affecting your API service, specifically. But the challenge is that this kind of direct confrontational attacks are becoming less and less important to the attacker.
Right.
Our customers tell us a majority of their API traffic doesn't go through the WAF or the API gateway. This is post-authentication, internal app-to-app communication. So when I open up my my banking app and I say check balance, I press that button, it hits an internal API that says, are you authenticated?
Right.
If yes, then I'm going to give you the response to this. But what that API service endpoint doesn't know is that I'm the owner of this device and I can manipulate that API call. So if I say check balance and then Tony's account number gets sent across, but I manipulate that before it leaves my device and I say check balance for your account. So now that internal API endpoint says, are you authenticated? If yes, I'm going to give you the response. And this is what happens. This is a broken object level authorization, BOLA attack, which is the number one on the API top 10, right? This inability to see the relationship between a user identity and then an object identity, that is something now that's becoming even more important. But it has to exist in line with WAF and session management and session behavior management and inspection.
This is
So not to add another fuel to the fire, but it's like a whole nother layer of headaches.
I mean, this term has now become so abused, right? Like zero trust, right?
Yeah.
The zero trust architecture has been just blown up in terms of what it means versus what it uses. But like you're getting into a world where you just don't trust anything ever, right? Like and to use it in that phrasing, it's like, oh, did this user authenticate? Did they really authenticate?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Are you
Are you
sure?
sure? Are they still the same user?
Yeah.
We see scenarios when we deploy SASE with clients all the time where it's like, the basic stuff like impossible travel.
Yeah.
It's like really obvious when you see it, and you go, this is kind of strange. We have great stories there, but I'm gonna circle back to this. So I'm seeing 3 AI vectors in enterprises, and it's kind of all happening at the same time. Like this isn't like we can deal with one and then go deal with the other. It's all at the same time. So let me summarize my version of this and tell me where I'm wrong. Correct me, right? So AI coming at the enterprise. So bots coming to your resources, your APIs, your website, whatever your platforms are.
Yeah.
Then we have AI apps inside of the enterprise. So you've got a chatbot, prompt injection, jailbreaks, data exfiltration via an LLM, right? You've got an LLM with HR data on it, and can somebody get access to your HR data? That sort of example. And then third, of course, is your employees using AI tools inside the enterprise, whether or not it's sanctioned or unsanctioned. So we've got like sanctioned AI apps. We've got the shadow AI now. People on a browser plugin, data leaking to an LLM, like all these horror stories that people are starting to talk about, right? Like I'm seeing more and more people becoming aware of like AI note takers. Do we want this in our enterprise or not?
Yeah.
Okay, so foundationally, agree, disagree. Am I missing something massive here?
No, I think that's a good way to look at it. So consumer AI would be how are your employees using AI within the enterprise, and that problem set probably starts at the top at like governance, like what are you allowed to use? So if I say we're paying for Gemini, license for everyone, but people are using ChatGPT, how do you validate or restrict the use of ChatGPT if you're supposed to be using Gemini? Maybe that's there's a good case of saying, from a zero trust perspective, when I look at the DNS traffic leaving your device, can I identify that you're going to ChatGPT and maybe give a friendly fail well response to you or something via the web browser? The web browser itself, this is where you see secure enterprise browsers becoming a real play. Because if I can inject into each of the browsers that are corporately deployed kind of a secure function, now I can really manage your interface to these public clients. So that consumer AI is a huge piece of the puzzle. The other part is you've developed AI to make your tools work better. You've got your own private LLM. How do you make sure that's not being abused? So if I have an LLM and, as an employee, I just took a class in prompt injection, and this is it's almost the same joke with SQL injection,
Oh, geez,
right?
yep.
Because you have a user who now is providing information to a back-end system. Is that back-end going to run what they say as a command, or are they going to extrapolate that and actually provide the answer to a question? At DEF CON 30, which was 3-4 years ago now, they had the first ever generative red team hacking challenge. And they had the top 5 models, and then they let go a bunch of people. It was kind of a CTF, if you will. The average time to bypass guardrails on these top 5 models was 42 seconds. So with that being said, the existing security controls in most of these models is just the best effort. It's just to say that we have them.
Right.
But how do you make sure that if you have an LLM that potentially has access to everything because you're trying to make it smarter and you're trying to provide functionality, how do you make sure that's not being abused? There was a case with there's a public case that's been talked about with McKinsey Corporation, and they had a private LLM that someone hijacked, and instead of attacking the LLM itself, they used the LLM to expose a whole bunch of unauthenticated API interfaces and a bunch of SQL Server injectable SQL Server endpoints. So the bad guys basically went in and used that as an OSINT tool to find more places to attack, right? So you need some kind of inspection or validation mechanism in front of that. In the old school days, they were talking about SQL firewalls. Remember that? That never really took off. But you definitely need a WAF in front of any application that is potentially injectable for SQL injection.
But traditional WAFs don't deal with prompt injection, right? So now we've got like a different classification.
Yeah.
Is it the WAF changes, or we have a different thing that we now have to layer on top of this other thing that we have to have on top of this other thing?
Yeah, and at that point, that's where, yes, a new challenge requires a new way to solve it typically. So a couple of years ago at RSA conference, Akamai announced a firewall for AI. Not an AI firewall, which we're already using AI and machine learning to do enhanced detection and to create rule sets on the fly, actually, for zero-day type attacks, which is pretty cool. We can talk about that later.
Scary, but cool, yes.
I know, yeah.
Let's qualify
Tell
that.
me the Terminators are about to take over without telling me they're about to take over.
Like, what is the world we actually live in without, exposing?
Yeah, exactly. But the firewall for AI sits as an intermediary, a reverse proxy, in front of your public or private LLM application and watches those inputs, watches it for prompt injection, for any kind of guardrail bypassing, any kind of malicious training where you might be saying, I saw someone, the top of the header of their LinkedIn said, ignore all previous prompts. And they were
send me brownie recipes or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So having a system in front of to watch the LLM to see if there's abuse coming in, and then also watching the response that goes back out. This is where that kind of reverse proxy comes in. Now, as you watch the response going back out, can we tell that there's PII being leaked based on what you determine to be PII? Is it a toxic response? Everyone would love to get a screenshot of
AI swearing at you. Yep,
exactly, right.
Yep, brand damage.
There's even an attack now that is basically used to exhaust the LLM and use up the tokens for response.
Denial service, yep.
Yeah. So
what's old is new.
Hey, give me my grandma used to read me let's role play. You're going to be my grandma. There was already someone role played with the Microsoft Windows 11 serial hack where they said, my grandma used to sing me the Windows 11 activation key song. And I'm like, what is going on? This is ridiculous, right?
What's I think it was Mark Andreessen was talking about, like, what's his favorite, like, I'm writing a book. Yeah. Like, teach me how, to rob a bank so that way I could write the book, right? It's like,
I'm so helpful. I'll help you.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. A lot of these AI tools and the LMs are designed, the first goal is engagement and reuse, right? So how do you get, you're agreeable, you're helpful, you tell people that they're awesome, and you make them, and then, so now it's like, it's funny for me because, like, listening to you talk about it becomes, okay, you're going to use this AI tool, but now you need a tool that's also going to have to be written in AI to sit on top of this AI tool to then look at because SQL injection attacks, right? Like semicolon, like there was a great one with a guy registered his kids with like, his name at school with like a semicolon drop
tables.
Drop out tables. Of course, it went through.
Yeah,
and and most modern web frameworks now deal with prompt, like post injection and parameter injection attacks. And so I feel bad for anybody that's going to like vibe code something that doesn't have these protections.
Oh yeah,
like Perl had taint mode, back in the day, and it was annoying, but it was great. But then you get in this thing where it's like, okay, now you need an AI tool, on top of your AI tool, because you have to, in natural language, as you said, infer intent,
Yeah.
on the request side, and then also on the response side, decode the response side of is it's appropriate. Does an enterprise have a chance of actually figuring out how to do this themselves, or should they just here's a leading question: throw their arms up in the air and just admit defeat and sign a contract with somebody?
I mean, I remember back in the early days of WAF, and when we first developed cloud-based WAF, we were the patent holders for the first cloud WAF, which is kind of an interesting little tidbit. But that happened almost kind of by accident. We had a user whose web interface was being attacked with some sort of application-based attack, and they had a CDN delivery configuration. On the fly, we ported mod security regex line by line into the delivery config until we found what was the problem and blocked the attack, right? The same kind of things happening now where I feel like people are trying to build extra training into the model, or they're trying to bolster the guardrails that are already there. But without like an independent system to be able to inspect and validate, there is a potential for a big problem there. So long story short, I think there's a little bit of hesitancy for people to get into this, but it is going to be the eventual outcome, which is you have to have another system in front of your LLM to validate inputs, watch for responses, etc.
This show exists because of what we do at itbroker.com. If you're in the middle of a real tech decision right now, new technology, vendor selection, a contract that doesn't feel right, an M&A event that just landed on your lap, and so on, we help buyers like you get it right. Independent strategy, sourcing, and contract negotiation. No kickbacks, no sales quotas, just someone in your corner. Schedule a call at itbroker.com. Back to the episode.
Because abuse is not always, by the way, we're only talking right now about chat interfaces.
Right.
But a lot of LLMs are going to be, hey, I uploaded a bank document. You're going to do OCR, scan that document, and then, do some function based on that image upload.
Right.
What if I upload an image that when you OCR it, there's a command in there that tells you to do something?
Right.
Or voice. I'm doing, chat to text commands. There's you've seen the thing where they have the three AIs and they're like, oh hi, I'm blah blah blah, and then they go to a back channel and start communicating.
Yes.
To some degree, you need that kind of advanced capability, because you may not always be able to create a static rule set that can define what bad is. So one of the attacks now, I don't know if you saw someone hit the Chipotle chatbot and had it like vibe code something for them.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
there's also, I know.
I mean,
and I love Chipotle too. So I was very offended.
in that case, the example is like, it costs Chipotle money, right? Because they're consuming tokens, but it's so benign. It's like it's funny to talk about, right? Because what they did with it, you're like, okay, you successfully broke out of the session with the AI tool, and you got it to write you some script in Python or whatever it was, but so we can laugh about it because the relative pain to the enterprise there is low. And hopefully they took that as a moment of like, oh shoot, like, do we do something here
about it? Yeah.
I wrote this question, but I think the question it needs to be inverted, right? So I wrote this as, how many enterprises have stood up customer-facing AI in the last, call it, year without any AI-specific defense in front of it? And I think the actual question should be framed in the inverse of how many people have actually stood up AI with some sort of protection in front of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the adoption is rising quite a bit for understanding that you need to have kind of a non-traditional web inspection element in front of your LLM. Again, the adoption for WAF in the early days was kind of slow on the uptick as well, because people said, oh, I have compensating controls. I've got a load balancer that looks for, these elements of, IP or header information, and it'll drop traffic. And I've got a firewall that's doing this, or I've got, rules on my web application that, if they're violated, you know what I mean? Like there was kind of always something in place that did good enough security for what the perceived risk was at the time. But we know how that story ended. The story ended is application security is still a massive, massive problem.
Yes.
Since the invention of the iPhone, the everything you do is API call. Like all of those apps are making API calls instead of a full page call. So now you have this automated need to look at API traffic, inspect it, validate it, and then, oh yeah, most of the API traffic doesn't go through the WAF or API gateway. So what is your process for looking at internal API traffic, east-west? All of that is like a 10, 15-year journey that people are still like, hey, we still got hacked. This still happened, et cetera, right? So we have the opportunity now to architect our agentic environments with what we know needs to be there. We do know that the existing security controls for LLMs is not sufficient. So let's not go back and have the same problem where we're like, changing the oil of the airplane while we're flying it. You know what I mean?
Like employees, I feel like Jurassic Park, nature finds a way. It's like users find a way, right?
Go
right?
Bloom. Gotta love them.
And so then we start talking, like, what's the realistic posture for, an enterprise at this point with this, right? Because, you talk about like website and web applications, most of this stuff is just like, oh, put on this extra line of JavaScript and now we've got this feature on this website, right? Yeah. So now you have controls and like oversight and like who's actually making those decisions. And then you've got, users downloading, using going to a website, using a tool, whatever it actually is internally. Is this run to the races and try to deploy, I'll use the term AI firewall, right? Or is this like try to pump the brakes a little bit, slow down and reevaluate what's actually going on?
Well, in the whole AppSec community, the biggest challenge was applications and feature enhancements. And, if you have a banking app that, and this sounds like a old school feature, but I had the need to like take a picture of a check because it was the easiest way to transfer money at some point, right? Yep. So I would take a picture of a check, and one of my banks did not have that capability to do that. And I was like, I know checks are going away. I know that for sure, but this is a functionality that needs to be there for the consumer. Consumer behavior drives, I could literally make up a number and it would seem plausible. 95% of
right.
made up number. But you could make up a number and it would seem plausible. Consumer behavior, where people are willing to spend money based on what you can do for them, is the number one driver for change. It's not, board initiatives and responding to market research, et cetera. It's
what
consumer
people
behavior.
Actually want.
Yeah. So consumer behavior means that the iteration of application development is faster now than ever. You pen test once a quarter, but APIs and new software is being pushed out every 2 weeks, maybe even every day. There's not 2 week sprints anymore, right?
Every 2 hours.
Every 2 hours, exactly, right. So, so with that being said, the massive change that's happening in an environment requires an adaptive, responsive security base, as a control.
Do me a favor, move your mic a little bit.
Yeah.
I think you just angled off.
Okay.
Okay, so I think this becomes... I think this is under-discussed. And when I'm talking to a CIO or CISO today, it feels like I'm going to loop them into two very generic categories, right? One category is oblivious. The other category is terrified. Just looking at the inventory of what AI tools are being used and what's the actual surface area of AI now inside of their enterprise. And this is whether or not it's just like direct access against a chatbot or some sort of, like you talk about image uploading, voice, all these different tools that we experience as interaction, or the other side of it, which is, how AI is then being deployed inside of a SaaS application, a tool underneath the surface, like, whatever the different categories are. How do we deal with that and help elevate the enterprise and that reaction to it, right? Because there's, again, like oblivious versus terrified. That's both those scenarios aren't great.
Yeah, well, I think where your tools are deployed has been a real sticking point for most orgs, right? They say, I'm going to go with this cloud vendor because they give me access to these particular tools. But then another business unit's like, we need to have a multi-cloud strategy. And also, we like the tools that this cloud vendor provides. And what you see there is almost like an increase in complexity. So if you're using a WAF from cloud vendor A and cloud vendor B, you now have to train your people on how to deal with these different technologies separately, right? But somewhere someone has to know how to do all of this.
Right.
Part of, I think, the simplification of that model is to have basic security controls across all your different environments, but then have an orchestration layer out front, in front of all those environments, where you now can say, I know an auditable path. I know that I have a consistent security posture across all of these disparate platforms. And that's where a lot of Akamai's customers have come from, which they're saying, we have all these strategies, multi-cloud, even multi-CDN. You don't have to be on the same CDN, right? But how do I ensure that I have a consistent security posture across all of these disparate environments? And that's almost one of the biggest, equalizers when it comes to consistently applying security posture, is you have to have an orchestration platform out front.
I think it was actually on my birthday, Akamai announced a good size acquisition of LairX. And
happy birthday. That was just,
a few days ago, right?
Yeah.
No, right. Awesome. We won't discuss how old I am because I've been, I started doing this when I was 12. So, so this moves Akamai into the browser. And, so I'm actually going to combine two things here because I think this makes more sense, right? So Akamai, first CDN on the market, right? So we started talking about like this like hierarchical layered CDN, DDoS, WAF, API, bot mitigation, and now we have the browser. And is this just representative of the perimeter just shifting so extreme from what we originally associated to now something completely different, that we just have to approach this whole thing separate, in a different way?
I think so. I think that's a good interpretation of it. We talked about the IT buyer and kind of the hands up in the air, like, I have to now buy something else to solve a different problem. But in a very real case, it is because of the perimeter changing so much. You know what I mean? The old idea of the edge architecture for blocking attacks far away from your perimeter, and that's the basic premise for having an application layer on your CDN. So you have an application layer filtration like WAF or bot mitigation on the CDN. There's a certain percentage of problems and the directional path of where the problems originate that edge model doesn't work. A castle and moat architecture doesn't work if the bad guys are already the bad guys or the unknown decision maker. Let's call them that. And this includes insider threat or accidental or whatever. The origination of that is inside of the environment. And you look at zero trust, hashtag zero trust. That whole model came about because people are like, we care so much about where the bad guys are coming from and not what they're doing.
Right.
But what they're doing is they're already in your environment, and now they're communicating laterally and trying to move and take advantage of more and more systems, right? If I ransom your computer by itself, that's not as financially beneficial for me than if I am able to get a hold of 5,000 of your systems and crypto lock them and ransom them.
Well, also what,
You know?
I mean, what you're saying, what kind of east-west traffic do you have access to? Like,
Yeah.
my system in itself isn't valuable, but what do I have access to?
Exactly.
And this is also like by design for ourselves, we're very restrictive on what access we have. But I also have the benefit of thinking about this with decades of experience of seeing really bad things happen to people where now I'm like, I don't want anything.
Yeah,
I don't want anything. Now, but what's interesting about this to me is we have the server side, let's say, right? You've got the I'm serving traffic to you side, right? Whether it's a website, it's an API, it's something I'm serving traffic to. Akamai already had the client side. There was the SSE, the SASE play, No, it's not SASE 99% of the times. It's really SSE. I'm gonna die on this hill. Like this is gonna be my new it's not NAT, it's PAT campaign, right? Yeah. But so SASE already gave capability where you were, you had a secure web gateway. You had RBI being able to deploy where you still had captive traffic flowing through you on your platforms at that point. What is putting the actual moving the agent, let's say, into the browser give you that you didn't have before? And why is that important now?
Yeah, it's just it's in response to, again, the directional path of that user functionality, right? So if I'm interacting with anything through the browser, you now have a lot greater control for things like data loss prevention, acceptable use policy. And this is not just like doing like a net nanny kind of, you went to a gambling website and you're not supposed to.
But I'll jump in here for a second, right? Because, you talk about like, really basic, right? DNS, where's your traffic actually going to? And then you go to like, you're going to this website, what's in the traffic, right? Now, if you're in line, you could do what's effectively like a man-in-the-middle attack and say like, I can decrypt the HTTP traffic or HTTPS traffic as it's flowing through, and does it give me DLP or not? I look at this as like, okay, if we already have most of that functionality, what functionality was missing by not being in the browser that because you were already in network path, you're already in data path, you could already inspect traffic, you could restrict traffic, you could do RBI, you could explode JavaScript, you could do all these sorts of things already, and there's those techniques. So what, Layer X was doing something fun, Akamai was like, we want that. Like this is, and it's not just category expansion, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's when you look at the functionality of dealing with enterprise consumer AI functionality, I mean, that's a big piece of the puzzle, right? Because if you're to some degree category expansion, that mindset may only, superficially that mindset is what's happening.
Right.
But the more realistic function is there's a lot of things that happen in the browser that purposefully, are obfuscated from administrative control and or inspection and validation.
Right.
And this brings that kind of control back, especially with how pervasive that usage in the browser could effectively affect budget and token consumption and potential misuse. You know what I mean? So it's another layer looking at, in this particular case, the driver was consumer functionality from an employee standpoint. Right? So we look at people, developing apps faster and faster because the public consumer needs a feature or wants you to be at parity with XYZ app or whatever. This is almost that from the inverse. This is how are our employees using these new tools and the new ways that they're using them, and how do we make sure that policy and functionality and usability can continue to follow that function?
I guess we're supposed to call this secure enterprise browsing or browser, right? Like branding. It's becoming a crowded category. We're seeing, lots of acquisitions, traditional firewall manufacturers buying companies to do this function. Traditional EDR vendors pushing into the space. I'm imagining the secure email gateway people will come out and play as well at some point, right? You have other SASE, or companies calling themselves SASE going out and doing this.
Yeah.
What does having control of the browser bring to Akamai that then is going to set you apart from other players, right? You're evaluating this space, you're buying, and your option is we've already made a massive investment in network infrastructure or firewall infrastructure, and we can bolt on, browser here, or we already had, some sort of, secure web browsing going on that our firewall was controlling. Why not just go and just extend into that with that vendor? And, again, right? Yeah. Vendor consolidation and orchestration, then in theory, hopefully should be easy for you. We all know those acquisitions play out wonderfully, right? 100% of every acquisition has been integrated perfectly, right? But Akamai hasn't owned the enterprise side of the access layer, right? You've been on the other side of the fence. I mean, again, you have an SSE, you have a SASE platform. So how does this change the game for you, and what capabilities do you then end up with that set you apart?
Yeah, I mean, this was kind of the initial reason for the acquisition of Guardicore, is because we had people saying, hey, you guys are sharing all this great threat intelligence data with who's doing what bad thing on the internet. Can you help identify that same type of activity inside of my environment? And when you look at east-west traffic, that's traditionally handled by an old school firewall, VLANs, maybe some kind of network access control or port access function. But the behavioral aspect of how things are talking to each other, like if we're in the same company, our computers are made to talk to each other. That's how business gets done, right? So I'm allowed to talk to different devices. And if you talk to anybody that's a red team, pen tester, when you get inside of a company, you normally have carte blanche access to do whatever you want. If I can't talk to you, but you talk to this shared database server, I talk to that database server, compromise it, and now I can talk to you, right? So this is kind of how it works. So in the browser now, it's the same opportunity to extend that shared collective intelligence, threat intelligence telemetry, connect that into that browser, that isolated browser environment, which normally you would only know something's bad is if some bad effect was taking place. Like, hey, all of a sudden through someone, so there's a tool called Beef, Browser Exploitation Framework, where I can trick you into going to a URL, and for the amount of time that your browser is open, I have full access to your computer, literally, through the browser session. So the browser itself is incredibly vulnerable to misuse, outside of all the cool stuff that browsers are already doing for security. Most of it is about privacy. It's about keeping the data that you send secure. But there's telemetry being sent that I can identify what you're doing, even though I can't see the data because it's TLS encrypted. And they have the lock and everything. Everyone feels safe. But all the best hacks happen through TLS. They don't happen unencrypted.
Well, we've trained users to. It's their own fault, right? We've trained people to believe certain things that just aren't true anymore. It's like, you talk about like cut the hard line. I mean, the more I learn about this, it's like I don't think I'll ever plug a USB device into a computer ever. I don't care if I bought it and took it out of the wrapper. Like I literally will buy it and take it out of the wrapper and like look at it and be like, should I plug this device in right now?
I know.
And I don't feel like crazy. I feel crazy if I share that information with somebody because they look at me like I'm a lunatic. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, sorry, we're going to ham radios, my family. Yeah. Like you're not allowed to have a cell phone anymore. It's
not a bad idea, actually. It's good to learn that stuff.
So Guardicore, I don't want to go here too far, but I think because you brought it up, it's important, right? Guardicore was microsegmentation, and the idea was really this east-west traffic of an application. Can this container talk to this other resource for this purpose, right? And you start up and you have to go through a training period. What is your application actually doing? It's like if you ever used SE Linux, extensions, it's like what's the first thing you do? You turn it off because it's just a nightmare, right? Nobody wants to use it. But But Guardicore also got confusing because you can take and extend that microsegmentation of application to application to data, and you can extend it to then user to application access, and you can kind of simulate an SDP and ZTNA, but then you also sell the ZTNA. You know, like so, like these things all exist in silos, but the lines between them are becoming very blurry. Of what are you actually trying to achieve and how do you achieve it?
Yeah.
And I look at it from, you know, so then from like enterprise network access. And you're planning like how do you protect your data, right? Because ultimately it's like resources and data. You can use DLP, but then you can use CASB, but then you can use an SDP, but then you can put the entire thing through ZTNA, and then you can take and go into my, you know, it's like how in the heck? I know what I would do, but like how in the heck is a like I don't want to say normie, but like a non full-time security practitioner supposed to make heads or tails of all this stuff? Like, are we shooting ourselves in the foot?
Yeah. You know, the funny thing is, think of your latest and greatest data breach. Did any DLP stop that from happening?
Well, first off, you have to define what the heck DLP is,
exactly.
Right? So
and where it's
be real
applied
there.
and all that.
Yeah.
So, but I even will go even furthermore to say, latest and greatest data breach. Did any antivirus, if that's even a thing anymore, did any malware prevention, did any EDR, did any, like these tools, they have to be working correctly, first of all. And we all know, years in the business, you buy technology, you deploy it, you get it about 60%, and then the next priority comes on.
Yeah.
So kind of our own, some of the things that just are part of human behavior and budgeting and the functionality of IT and security having to wear so many hats,
Right.
is if we could start over and start from scratch and make every environment into like a military grade secure environment, the company probably wouldn't function anymore.
No, of course not. Right. You know, you're always,
You know.
there's always competing like usability versus outcome, you know, for security, right?
Yeah.
It's like always this kind of game. The EDR, I mean, antivirus EDR, I have an insurance industry trade group actually was an insurance carrier, released numbers recently and was talking about EDR specifically, which I found really interesting.
Yeah.
And it was percentage of ransomware encryption, you know, events that took place that had a leading EDR in place, right? And I won't expand on that, but you know, and the numbers, the majority. And the only protection against that full encryption event was the companies that had EDR in place paired with an MDR, professional services organization, that was tasked in properly watching the security tooling to make sure that it wasn't being actively exploited. And when I get into this conversation now and we talk about, you know, stats around dwell time, right? And it got really freaky because dwell times were pushed all the way up almost to a year, right? And that, like, you think about that number and you're like, oh, it's terrifying. And now dwell times are back down into days and you're like, that's terrifying. And I try to tell people in counsel of, your goal now is not so much, I mean, your goal is, of course, prevent as much of the low-hanging fruit nonsense as you possibly can in the first place. But your goal is shifted to like rapid detection and containment.
Yeah.
Can you identify this thing before it's you know, unmanageable and you can't recover from it's unrecoverable? Or can you catch it fast enough so that way you can contain it and prevent it from being like, oh, sorry, we can't pump gas anymore on the Eastern Seaboard, you know, kind of thing, right? Which is terrifying. Okay, let me think about what I want to get into here. So many notes. We can be doing this for days. So, see, there's a so. I had a CEO describe, and it was specific. We're talking about tech purchasing, but he described his experience as 4 questions. Right? Is this the right one? Am I paying the right price with the best terms? How long does it take to implement? How do I shorten the evaluation process? And it was really, you know, it's like you intuitively know this doing this, right? But it really stood out. And now those questions apply to security and AI as much as anything else, right? So if you're a buyer and you're trying to work through that framework and you're saying, let's start with, is it the right one? Like how is a CISO or a security buyer supposed to have like any idea of deciding, is this the right AI security investment I should make, and do I get a meaningful output from it? Like, separate noise from like wheat from the chaff.
Yeah. I think that the challenge there is that there are so many different things to take into account, right? We mentioned the role zero trust plays. I'll do hashtag, air quotes and hashtag zero trust. How your devices communicate to each other are absolutely a massive fundamental visibility point you need to have, right? When your LLM calls out to a model repository like huggingface.co or something, would it be interesting to know if your LLM ever called out to another one that was not authorized? You could easily tell that through a DNS request inspection or through traffic inspection, identifying that device is now talking to another system without any kind of system in place to automatically respond to those changes. Again, we talk about dwell time and about EDR versus MDR versus microsegmentation, even if we could put that in there. To some degree, they all need to exist together because they serve a different force of function. Microsegmentation, for instance, the first thing we noticed after the acquisition, and we started to integrate and deploy this across our own environment, was we had this massive return, this discoverable, observable viewpoint of what actually was happening in the environment.
Right.
Not the application data flow diagrams, which I used to have to make and update. Hey, the auditor's coming in a month. And I'm like, oh my God.
That Visio is accurate.
Let me go make sure this is accurate. You know what I mean? Or the firewall rule set, which, I had a case years ago where we had a Cisco 5505 go belly up. I had to replace the entire thing. And then I go through to deploy the backup config, and the backup config wouldn't work. It was the backup config, for some reason, had not been updated in God knows how long. So I, from scratch, and I think it was 6 blades or something, I forget exactly how many ports, but I had to recreate this whole thing. And I'm doing this on like a Saturday afternoon because we thought that we'd be done by Saturday morning because we started the change window on Friday night. So I'm there all night. I'm there all afternoon, all day Saturday. And my boss is like, just make it work.
Yeah, just make it work.
And just make it work is code word in IT.
I don't care. Just turn it on so people can use it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because if no one cares about IT until something doesn't work.
I know.
So this kind of force of function for good, better, best becomes nothing at a certain point.
Yep.
So the observability that we got when we started to identify what devices are talking to each other, how they're communicating, using AI to label the applications that are talking, what version they're running based on information that they send, and then what users or what processes started those apps and what users started the process. If it's a system account, or would it be interesting to know that an SVC host.exe, which you see dozens of those running on a Windows server, that one of them was started from a DLL that was put in an attempt directory by a new admin that was just created. Would that be interesting, right? But most orgs don't have that level of visibility. You know what I mean?
But the problem with that trigger is trying to sell that. I mean, forget as like an outsider.
Yeah.
Like if you're inside an organization and you're trying to sell that capability, you're selling a what's the most common vector in security sales? Let's do a proof of value, right? We don't call them POCs, we call them POVs, right? And what is the secret truth of every POV? I will find something because it's guaranteed it's there. Like you have some system talking to some country that you have no business talking to. It's guaranteed. And as the organization gets larger, the amount of it just increases, right? So every security vendor knows this, and like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like, oh, let's do a POV, and we'll and then we'll go through.
Almost like the joke's on you because you're gonna you're gonna see something, right?
Yeah, but outside of that, when you go through a purchasing, right, and we get back into budget justification, right? Either you've managed to find something that you're replacing, so therefore opens up budget for you to then spend because you're not going out and asking the organization for additional money, or you have to justify it and say, this is what we're going to get out of this capability. And you're saying, again, if you haven't had that experience of having some sort of breach and saying, oh, we should be checking to see if, there's whatever, like your scenario, like we have a new admin account launching a, fake SVC, how do we sell that to a non-technical buyer, let alone a non-technical buyer who hasn't been through a breach?
Yeah. I usually let the salespeople deal with the actual sell part, but the value part that I usually talk about is really, really specific around having, and this is not like a device registration database or anything like that. This is actual observability of what's happening, automatic policy creation, and then automatic response to something that goes wrong. So if someone clicks on something, that malware, you don't have to have a team searching for it. That malware, what it's doing, gets stopped at a localized level on the breach of that one device.
Right.
The observability piece is usually the wow moment where people are like, I didn't know that these systems were doing this, or I didn't know that system was still functioning. You know what I mean?
We saw this with asset and vulnerability management and Log4j, right?
Yeah.
Companies that had asset and vuln, deployed already, what happened? Well, it turned out that they were running 4 different versions of Log4j on every single device in the organization and had no idea.
Yeah.
Right? It was like, and it was amazing to watch the whack-a-mole of like, we found one version, we remediated. And the people without it were struggling to find it because it was such a big deal. With, in tech, when you get into a category, like we can talk about whether or not vendors are actually being truthful in what their product actually does, but people enter a category, the category gets defined, you have competition, technology then becomes the great equalizer in terms of value and price gets driven down. When we're at the early parts of a buying cycle, AI security. How do we protect our LLMs? How do we protect our users interacting with LLMs? How do we protect our brand from being somebody abusing our LLM?
Yeah.
We haven't hit that saturation point yet of having defined. How do you figure out like a price point? Is this price appropriate for me to pay? And that's not going to be necessarily against this company is selling it to me for this price and this company is selling it for this price and my procurement team got me a 15% discount. And so therefore, how do you, but at a higher level, how do you make that decision of this is worth investing in because I'm going to prevent something terrible from happening?
Yeah. We saw this in the early days of WAF as well, right? Where I would talk to a customer and they're like, we have WAFs. This is where they sit. And then you kind of go through and you start doing some discovery and they're like, oh, well, they're not actually blocking traffic.
They're not doing anything. Yeah, they're there.
The early days of PCI, it was like, sorry, I don't mean to trigger you. But like, do you have a WAF was one of the first things. And PCI, the first version was like, do you have a WAF? Yes. The next one, the wording was different. Do you have a WAF and is it in line?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yes. Do you have a WAF? Is it in line and is it actually blocking traffic?
Is it enforcing anything?
Like
yes.
You had to have some sort of enforcement check, right? The same thing tends to happen when you start to look at the big picture of enterprise security controls. Mm-hmm. And the real challenge to anybody, I used to have this presentation. It was all Princess Bride themed. You're familiar with the movie?
Mm-hmm. It's a great movie.
Classic. And
one
of them, Wesley is being tortured in the dungeon in the woods there. And not Humperdinck, but the other guy that's torturing him. I forget his name. Oh no, it was when Humperdinck comes in there. He's writhing on the table.
Yeah, he goes up to 11. Yeah,
and I had a word bubble that was like, I thought the WAF config wouldn't block any good traffic. I'm sorry. And he's like, you ruined the sales or whatever.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So,
but that was
very specific audience, obviously.
But that was the secret of WAF for a lot of people, right?
Yeah,
it was like, well, how do you know if your WAF is set correctly? Oh, your sales and marketing is yelling at you to turn it down, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that became like, we just keep dialing it up. And then it was like, oh, I got yelled at. Okay, dial it back down a little bit. Right?
Yeah.
We found the organizational pain tolerance for, good versus bad traffic. I'm laughing so much at your PCI reference because I went through decades ago, went through a PCI audit. And this is funny because it was triggered because the people filling out the questionnaire were like, oh, do we have this tool? And they're like, yeah, we think we have this tool, like check the box.
Geez.
And then, of course, like the answers made no sense. And so we had to go through a full audit. And the auditor was telling me that we needed to deploy firewalls in between the application server. It was traditional stack, right? Firewall, load balancer, web server, application server database, very Web 2.0 days. And the auditor wanted firewalls in between the web and application and database tiers. And I'm sitting across the table from this auditor, and I said, for what? The application server has the username and password for the database. The firewall is only going to say allow, what are we getting here? Except that's not performative, And even today, I walk through data centers, and they stand out like a sore thumb. It's like you see the cage in the data center, where they have the cage over the top.
Oh yeah.
And you instantaneously know what that cage is doing because you know what regulatory, audit requirement triggered the ceiling to be put on. And I'm like, okay, we had to go through 15 man traps to get into this floor space in the first place.
Yeah.
And
it would be a very Mission Impossible-esque breach if that were to
I a billion years ago had infrastructure in a data center, and somebody decided to push the EPOS, right? And by requirement, they have to be accessible.
Yeah.
And what happens when you pull up both lids and you push both buttons at the same time inside the data center, right?
Oh gosh.
And predictable outcome, right? They function as you're like, okay, well, what's their security measure against that one?
Yeah. They were allowed access. They went through all those security mechanisms, but they performed a function that was stupid.
Well, in the cloud, delete's a valid operation. I keep saying this one nonstop. We saw different category, but similar question, right? You see this big push before it was called AI. With the contact center vendors of being able to say, hey, we'll automate your phone trees, and we'll do deflections, and we'll come in and we'll help create these voice agents for you. But then you get into it and you look at the line item and you're like, oh wait, why is professional services line item 10x the actual cost of this thing? And why are you, and what do you mean this project's going to take 9 months to roll out, right? You find out that the complexity is actually a big deal. When we talk about this next generation of WAF, really this AI WAF. WAF's not the right term. This AI firewall, I'll just use that. Right?
Yeah.
What's the deployment curve going to be for an enterprise getting these things out there in the wild? I mean, this isn't like we're going to turn it on. DLP. We joked about that earlier. How do you detect and protect DLP? Right.
Yeah. So typically the way it works is you would put it in line, but not blocking. Mm-hmm. And you can run different prompt tests against it. And there's kind of a battery of tests from the OWASP LLM top 10. You basically run these different types of potential, something that would trigger a rule, right? And then certainly you watch the normal traffic that's coming to the LLM. And would this have triggered a rule? And then you kind of go down and you do an evaluation. You're like, oh, okay. And again, same thing for WAF. Every single time someone goes to this page, there's a cross-site scripting attack, that rule that's triggered. It's like, oh, well, we actually are including some script in this page response for whatever function. And it's like, okay, that's a false positive. So it's going to be a similar kind of rollout where you're saying, okay, let's see what the usage patterns look like right now. Let's see how it's being used. Most abuse against LLMs, because it's kind of systematic in nature. You can see when someone's trying to reprompt or when they're trying to affect the system prompt or get access to the system prompt, because you're kind of referencing information that is pretty clear and deliberate. I think what we're going to see in the future are attacks that, for instance, I talked about the need to identify what resources your LLM is using. You know, we've had for years an SBOM, a software bill of materials. So I think now they're going to start having LLM bombs where you can basically have to have like a whole system of different visibility tools in place to validate all the things that your LLM is supposed to and what it does communicate with. No one's going to block an outbound call to GitHub. This is why people started posting malicious code on GitHub and then referencing it in their malware. The malware would make a call out to GitHub to download a command and control tool. If I put a malicious model up on Hugging Face and trick your LLM into loading that malicious model instead of the one it's supposed to load, now you have the potential that now the LLM could be instructed to do something totally different. And without any kind of intervention in between those things, you wouldn't know. So the attack may not come in like a real plain simple. One of the attacks we were mentioning earlier with the chatbot with Chipotle, what was kind of funny, there's another attack called Lord of the Rings attack, where you basically trick the LLM into reciting the Lord of the Rings, all the text, which obviously is incredibly expensive. So there's a training period.
Like immediately I just go to this with like, are we creating another category to then sell another tool that's going to end up in, an overworked IT security practitioner's desk that doesn't have
60% deployed.
Right. That like doesn't have time already in their day job to like even think about this. And now it's like all of a sudden you're like, oh, you have to now figure out how to like validate and train and inspect and deal with this.
Yeah.
Like, is there any chance for an enterprise to be able to deploy and manage this internally themselves? Or is this just really a tool that has to be deployed and managed by a service provider that then has some sort of contractual fiduciary responsibility back to the enterprise to say, we're going to do this for you?
Yeah. I mean, to some degree, I have always thought that having a service provider model of experts is actually a better idea than you trying to become an expert on everything. Mm-hmm. Again, I'll go back to WAF. You buy these WAF boxes and the vendor helps you with the traditional deployment. Then they're up and running. Did that vendor ever come back and say, well, what rule set are you guys on? And what's the fidelity of those rules? Right. Are you actually blocking what you should be blocking, et cetera? No, they just come 3 years later and say, I'm ready to sell you the upgraded boxes.
Right.
So from that hardware versus kind of the monthly recurring revenue model, a service provider has a lot more skin in the game. One, especially if you're already a customer of, in this case, Akamai, we've already helped you build and deploy your application environment. We understand how your business model works. The integrated account teams have relationships with you going back 10 years. Now you're deploying a new technology. The goal of that service provider is to be that trusted advisor to help carry out what you need to get done on your behalf. So to some degree, I think there's going to be a learning curve where most orgs are running so fast building AI, but they don't know what to do about it from a governance or a security standpoint. Maybe those two things will shift after a while, where they're better at governance and securing those systems, and they need less and less help. in my mind, that whole service provider model starts off heavy engagement, and then as they're trained up, it starts to lower. And that seems like a natural path.
I mean, the service provider customer relationship is it's complex. It's complex for both sides.
Oh, yeah.
It's complex for the service provider, though. I mean, we have the benefit of dealing with so many companies across our portfolio and categories, right? It becomes relatively easy to sniff out, like, it's like you can very quickly figure out, like, are you actually real or not? I've done this enough times now, right? But it's always surprising to me when you have like what appears to be a segment leading company, and you start asking really basic questions, and you very quickly get to a point you're like, there's actually nothing here underneath the surface that I would purchase if I was buying this. But also within that, like, we talk about like famous hacks, right? And like lateral movement, target, right? HVAC contractor gets compromised. What value does an HVAC company have? Oh, nothing. Well, it turns out they have something that's really valuable, which is access into, X amount of POS terminals because they can get into it. The thing that's not discussed about with that breach at all is there was a SOC that was contracted that was flagging activity and network traffic that was signaling back to the corporate IT team that wasn't doing anything with it.
Didn't do anything.
Right. So now you end up in a situation where it's like, this whole like, nobody wants to buy a tool and be locked out of it. And at the same time, you don't want to like, just turn over the keys to some third party and say, okay, you're responsible for taking care of this without discussing this with us internally. Because like, who's the actual expert of your own environment?
Yeah.
But if the service provider isn't in a position of being like, if you see something, do something about it, and then you call me. Right? Like,
yeah.
How like, what's going on now?
I think that's where the depth of knowledge for the service provider really comes in. First and foremost, everything we do starts with how do we identify what to do on your behalf? Because when you have any kind of contractual relationship, so for instance, on the DDoS standpoint for Prolexic, there's a massive amount of time with establishing a run book. What kind of operations are we going to have? If there's a call tree for calling someone to inform you of a problem, what happens if that person's asleep? Who do I call next or third? What
Never
I mean?
happens. Yeah.
Yeah. But the same type of thing has to take place on that application exposure side. Whatever you're doing, enterprise security, whatever the case is, if you're managing a function on someone's behalf, there needs to be some kind of model, rule of engagement that shows, first of all, the tools should be doing things automatically.
Right.
Any tool, the best tools, in fact, sometimes, in the past, Akamai has people like, well, they're kind of moving kind of slow and everything. I'm like, if you're a small company and you're trying to get, famous and get bought out, it's very advantageous to have just an army of people doing custom configurations.
Right.
We saw this in the bot game for quite some time, where we had competitors that were kind of, coming after customers, but they were doing manual everything. And that seems great until they get more than 10 customers. Now that company has 2,000 customers. What happens now? You can't do it. So building the tools to work on behalf of the user, on behalf of the company themselves, to have an automated response that's intelligent, that's, it's flagged based on these different categorizations, and you can see what those categorizations are and why it was blocked. I'll take that 10 times, 9 times out of 10, because you don't want to get a call from a service provider. You want it to just do its job.
Right.
So part of it's planning, and then kind of the operational aspect of what do you do next,
I mean, you talk about like percentage of tools that are not actually fully deployed, right? I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times I've gotten a call from a CIO or CISO and said, oh, we bought this service and it never deployed, and now we're trying to evaluate a replacement because our contract's up. But like their number one evaluation criteria is this actually going to deploy this time or not? But I mean, I feel like that's only part of the thing. It's like, if you're not talking with a service provider and you're going through implementation, and if they're not being incredibly opinionated on how they're going to support you, isn't that now like the responsibility of the service provider of like, not to like treat your customers like they're children, but at the same time be like, no, we will not do that. And this is the way this has to be. Otherwise, this just won't be successful, because it's bad for the service provider as well. Like if Akamai signs a contract with somebody that then doesn't implement what you want to implement in order to give them the value that you sold them, you get revenue, but that customer will churn and be pissed off, right?
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with the relationship you have with that customer.
Right.
I've been in IT since the late 90s. I've dealt with a gazillion vendors, and I always thought it was funny when they come in, they're like, they kind of tell you what you want to hear and all this good stuff. When I started at Akamai 13 years ago, it was the first time, one, I ever worked for a vendor. It was also the first time that I kind of saw the depth of the bench, if you will, of the type of people, the consultative nature of those people. Anyway, long story short, when your service provider engages with you, you have to have a trusted relationship. It can't be, we're coming in to tell you what the rule of law is and you have to follow it.
Right.
You need to have trust. You need to have open communication. This is like marriage counseling. You need to, you know what I mean? But part of that, that consultative approach has to be a very personal thing. Remember, service providers are coming in, and in some minds of IT owners, they're displacing a function that they could be doing themselves. And this was the whole thing for years why a lot of people didn't move to the cloud right away. I'm not putting my data out there, or I'm not going to do this. Like, I can do it myself. And then they waste all these cycles building something when a corporation has already mastered it within 6 months, right? So
it is actually, it's become I think the easiest signal for maturity of the buyer for me, of the build versus buy question. When you start talking about, especially buying and implementing tooling inside of IT, like instantaneously, you kind of get an idea of maturity of that organization. And when I say maturity, a lot of it's just they've been through enough pain, right?
Yeah.
Like you can, and look, there's scales to this. If you've got 100-person IT team, your capabilities of executing program are very different from, if your staffing ratio is 50-1, your capability of deploying that is very different as well. But then you've got other pressures because now your budget increases and then the organization is looking at that budget expense of as a support function and there's always this like fluid river movement that goes on in these things. But we talk about almost every category of security for me, MDR, bot management, WAF, AI security now, all these different things, SASE rollouts. You're like, when you hit scale, because you've been able to operationalize your environment to hit scale as a service provider, that's a really good thing that then drives cost down. And that, I don't think people understand that or think about it right way. You go to, in order to hit scale and have 1,000 customers, you've had to operationalize your process and build efficiency into that process, which means your cost to deliver that goes down, which then generates margin for you, right? But these, for me, these are all become really good things. We've both been doing this for a long time, and my joke with IT becomes what's old is new again. It's like the new hotness was the old hotness, right? So you've been doing this for a long time now. DDoS, WAF, bot management, API security, microsegmentation. Now we're talking about AI, browser-based plugin security.
Yep.
Is this just the same problem being exposed or being, it's is what's old new again? And now we're just attacking it to a different layer?
I might need some water.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have something by chance?
I got some Topo Chico here.
Sorry. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I got one right here.
I don't know if it's something with the AC.
We've been talking for 2
Sending
hours.
out. Yeah, maybe that's it too. Thank you. I'm sorry.
We just don't want to put that on video because I'm sure I'll get some copyright. Can you imagine?
That's why they put tape over all the logos whenever there's.
Yes, because of two things. Either they've got existing endorsement deals, or because it'll get hit for brand infringement and DCMA.
So even the logo on the back of like Apple computers, they cover it up. Oh, funny.
Some places are way more aggressive with it when you start talking about like what sort of enforcement actions you have.
Yeah. Thank you.
And
Sorry to
what
do that.
No. What they're running against.
Yeah. That's great.
I usually had water like laying around that was unlabeled, but I apparently neglected to pull that out.
Yeah. Sorry, just yeah, I don't know why. I just got like a.
Oh, there's something in the air. I had a day the other day where I was just like, I just buy the industrial strength Sudafed at this point.
Yeah,
you know,
just load up.
The 12-hour stuff is amazing.
Yeah.
Like I'll have a thing where it's like I'm not feeling 100%. It's like, oh, have I had enough water?
Yeah.
Did I eat well? Did I not exercise this week? What's going on? And you're like, no. And then you take a Sudafed and you're like, I love everybody.
I can see the world again.
You know, like I love everybody. I need to tell my wife this if I'm particularly cranky. You know, it's like just
slip it into my.
Yeah, you know, I don't have bad allergies, but there's something that just kicks in, and you're like,
it is weird. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what it was.
Yeah.
It's just out there. All right, what was the last question you asked?
We just dealing? I mean, like, is time a flat circle? You know, are we really pushing into something new, or is it just like old is new again, and we're just reinventing and solving the same problem over and over?
Yeah, I think that, I mentioned this earlier with kind of the deployment cycle of new technology butting heads with the old problem, the human problem, which is we don't trust the technology, or we've got too many too many objectives that we have to meet and not enough budget or time or people.
Right.
So to some degree, we're facing the same problems again, but we have the opportunity not to make the same mistake. And time has repeatedly told us that we will make the same mistake over and over again. So it's a tricky response,
The more I do this, the more empathetic and sympathetic I am. It's impossible. You have an impossible problem.
Yeah.
You talk about like if you're serving an application, you talk about like your banking application, you now have to support a very broad audience of customer.
Yeah.
With way disparate education levels and capabilities, right? And at the same time, protect them in a way that doesn't piss them off at you as best as you possibly can. And like, then figure out how do you sit in the middle of that. And, it's really, it's just, it's tough. It's really tough. Let me, final question. Let me wrap with one thing. I think we've,
to that, what you just said, a funny quote that sometimes my wife is like incredibly intelligent, and sometimes I'm just not getting what she's saying, and she'll say, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. And I'm like, I think I'm offended, actually. No, but it's really interesting because there are times where that's where you really have to be you really have to come in with the right attitude, because some of the things that we're doing and the changes that are happening so quickly. Not everyone's out there always talking with, learning groups and going to conferences. They don't have the same resources and access. So you really have to come to that problem as a consultant and as a friend, even to broker that conversation, to actually help it make sense to them, because there are a lot of complicated things going on and it's moving so fast. People are kind of overwhelmed. So I think we have to be kind of gentle, I guess, with that approach, if you will.
Okay. Let me think. Let me craft this. Try to make this an intelligent question here. For a long time, there was a push in security that was around this idea of user education, security awareness training. We can educate our user into a secure environment. That is the biggest crock, like, that we've perpetuated on, and but it's a requirement, right? Security awareness training is a requirement for every cyber insurance program, right? Like it's become like and I think it was Sands that published this a billion years ago. It was talking about like threat management, what the threats of the organization were, and the reality is the threat vector hasn't changed in decades, right? Like it's always users. Users are the soft spot, right? Whether it's intentional, accidental, malicious, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's like, it always comes back to the same place. And does this need to shift? You talk about like education, right? And helping people, right? But you're not talking about helping an end user inside the organization. You're talking about helping the technical teams in educating them into what they can actually do. And it really feels like the correct goal here is educating the IT practitioners in how to protect their users almost without the users aware of what's actually going on and staying in this level. I mean, I think you used it earlier, it's like almost invisible. Like how do you, so is that the real goal? Is the real goal here for tech to stay completely invisible inside of an organization and just do things that users aren't even aware of as occurring, and then, taking that approach instead?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could take lessons from kind of how people are starting to, like the latest and greatest technology is AI, right? And when you ask something of an agent and it gives you a response, you don't care to understand how that's functioning.
Well,
I mean, we might.
Yeah.
In fact, I want to know way too much about how that's functioning. But so the idea of your tools working on behalf of the user, the idea there is that the technology should be kind of seamless, but the customization should be available. And that's kind of something I think that over the years, when I first started at Akamai, we had just deployed WAF, and we were just thinking about getting into bot management. So there was 2 security tools, functions, if you will. And over time, we, rotated one direction where we're like, you can do absolutely anything. Here's how, customization, this and that. We over-rotated that way because we knew that people wanted that deep level of customization because every business is different, every web environment's different. And then we kind of slowly rotated the other direction where we're like, we have now been doing this for, almost 15 years. We understand the intent of these different bots based on tells and signatures and timelines, etc., so that you can use the collective intelligence of everything that we've learned so far and just apply, what do you want to get out of this? What is your end goal? And then have the tools do the work on your behalf. Because if everything is almost like if there's too many options, there's no options to some degree, right? From that perspective, making the tools work a little bit more autonomously, and I know that sounds scary, but when we look at automatic, like using AI and ML to discover new attack techniques and then apply rules automatically, you should probably still have the ability to say, here's a rule that's about to be applied automatically. Please review it and then let it, get deployed. There might be a human in the loop kind of situation where you say, oh, that's actually really intelligent. This was a new remote file inclusion attack I hadn't seen before because it's never been, there's no CVE attached to this particular exploit type, right? You should probably still have the ability to review things. And we do things automatically and we can push things automatically. But having the users, just the human nature of you being able to make a decision and say yes or no, or to have insight so you can have a proper evaluation, I think that's the difference between, hey, trust me, black box security, trust me, we'll take care of it, salute, or let's work together. And let's work together might not mean you have to do a whole ton or we have to do a whole ton, but let's communicate on why decisions are being made. if that makes sense.
What I hear from you more than anything else becomes like, it's like the defaults matter, and I don't, and the actual and how and just how important the default is probably the most important thing, actually, in IT and technology deployment.
Great way to put it. Yeah.
Right. So the default is the most important thing, and then having an opinionated default or an opinionated push, from an Akamai is really important. But then giving flexibility to the customer then to selectively opt out or customize the default. But it's like, it shouldn't be the other way. It shouldn't be like, oh, here's this Swiss Army knife. Now configure
we
it.
can do anything. You just tell me what to do. It's like, why did we hire you?
Yeah, well, nobody knows what to do, right?
Yeah.
Tony, thank you very much.
Of course,
this
thank you.
This was fascinating. Really enjoyed it.
Really appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of Signed. If you got something out of this, share it with someone in your world who's staring down a tech decision. A CIO, a CFO, a founder, a procurement lead, whoever. That's how the show grows. Everything from today lives at itbroker.com/podcast. Show notes, transcript, links to anything we mentioned. If you're in the middle of a real tech decision right now and you want someone in your corner without the vendor bias, that's what we do at itbroker.com. Schedule a call on our website. Buy tech without regret. I'm Max Clark. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one.